I hope everybody can hear me. Can you hear me all right? Well, thank you so much for having me come. It's a pivotal time in our history at Flatbed because we are moving, and currently today the last truckload is moving everything out of Flatbed to like 1 mile that direction as a crow flies, so we're really close to where we're going to be, and I'd love for you all to come when we're resettled. But just to give you an idea of Flatbed, we were established in 1989, and when Flatbed was established, we were really poised to work with so many wonderful artists here in Texas. Within the first 11 years that we were in operation, we had worked with James Surls, Melissa Miller, Robert Levers, Kelly Fearing, Bert Long, John Alexander, and Luis Jimenez, all of who I'd like to talk about today. They all came to Flatbed and they worked with our technical support to create etchings, lithographs, and later on lithographs with John Alexander, and relief prints, woodcuts, and lino cuts. We also used other kinds of techniques, and I want to show you some of those techniques in the slide presentation today and talk about that. And the reason why I titled it Dancing with the Matrix, when an artist who, like James, works in his studio in a whole different kind of media, comes to us at Flatbed, they've got to deal with other people other than their crew that they've worked with or just themselves. They've got to work with master printers and something called a matrix. All fine art printmaking has a matrix. That's the surface that the image is created on. It could be carved, it could be etched, it could be drawn on, but that matrix, the artist needs to work with it. And to me, it's like a dance. Whenever the artist comes and they have to step out on the floor, they have to put themselves out there to work with other people and with the matrix to get something made, to get an edition or even monoprints made. When we were established in 1989, my co-founder, Mark Smith, and I had one press between us. That was mine. I bought it in 1986, and we soon acquired 2 other presses and the workshop that you see on the slide right here. One of the first artists that we worked with was Robert Levers, and other artists that came along very soon. James Surls came. The dance floor is this shop you see here, and here's our shop the way it was, I guess, about 3 weeks ago before we just moved everything out. This is what the artist has to deal with when they come to Flatbed. They come to this space that they're not used to being in, and it holds our presses, it holds lots of other objects that we use to make prints with. And there are more people to deal with than the master printer. And this is just a little shop photograph of us working in the shop at Flatbed over at Martin Luther King that we just moved from. One of the first artists that we worked with was Robert Levers. Robert L. Levers was teaching at the University of Texas, but he was born in Brooklyn. He came to the University of Texas in the late 50s. I believe he was actually hired in 1961. And he had a very extensive career as a painter. He was the National Endowment of the Arts Fellow in 1976 and 1984. And he was included in the American exhibition in the Venice Biennale in 1984. He had a retrospective exhibition at Laguna Gloria in 1991. And in 1990, there was an interesting thing that happened just after Flatbed got started. The station, it was a television station here in Austin, KLRU, had a fundraiser, and they wanted to make money selling prints. So That's kind of an interesting thing. It's not always as easy as it seems, but they invited Robert Levers to make a print at Flatbed, and those prints were going to be offered to raise money for the station. And so he came to Flatbed. I'd never met Bob before. He had made prints at Printmaking Press in Dallas, and so he wasn't unfamiliar with making prints. He wanted to create prints using a soft ground method, which I was really in favor of. I love working with soft ground. And this is a picture of the matrix that he was working with to create the first print that we did together. You're seeing somebody holding a little dry point needle to add a little bit of dry point to some of the areas. But the real way of making the print is you cover the matrix with a wax. It's a very soft wax, and whenever the artist has a piece of paper over it, they can draw on the paper, and every mark that they draw on picks up some of the wax. So when you pull it off, you'll have a piece of copper that's completely covered with a soft ground wax, except for where the artist has drawn. And after etching, here you see the image on the matrix. That's the image that will be able to be printed. Here's a picture of that matrix being printed. Now, this particular print, which is called Four Terrorists in a Bull Ring, was never finished during his lifetime because Bob thought it might be too dark of a print for the KLRU auction. But we instead did a second print at the very same time, which is called Terrorist Juggling Plates. And here we have the Terrorist Juggling Plates print. And I apologize for not having the sizes. Both of these sizes are fairly small, as you could see from the matrix, but the Terrorist Juggling Plate image is 12 inches by 10 inches. And we did this in an edition of 28. And I think it was not extremely successful for KLRU because, you know, Bob's vision was an interesting one. It was quirky and dark at the same time, but a wonderful print that he did. This is the next print that we did together, and it's also a soft ground etching. But what you're seeing is an image that was printed on a 36 by 48 inch, from a 36 by 38 inch matrix. It's a very large copper matrix, and it's also done with a soft ground technique. So Bob, after he did those first two prints that you just saw, and we editioned the Terrorist Juggling Plates, had the idea of working on this size matrix and for his exhibition that he was going to be having at Laguna Gloria that very next year. So we finished this print. We finished a proof of it right before his exhibition, which was in the late fall of 1991. And we signed the edition in January of 1992. This is called oh gosh, now I'm stuttering because I'm getting nervous here. Victory, the Celebration. This is right after the Gulf War, and it's, if anybody were to ask me what print I've done in the last 30 years at Flatbed that I felt like it might be the most important thing I've ever done, I think it would be this print. It's the most universal of images I think we've ever created, and I think it's the most prophetic and the most important thing that we've been able to create. It's a monumental scale of a soft ground, and to do it we had to mix and create a new ground that would work for this plate. So we created a ground that could be applied in a liquid form. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Here's the picture of the matrix that's on the wall and several of the working states. Whenever you're creating any kind of etching or most any kind of print, there are going to be working states. The artist doesn't just draw usually and then we etch it and then it's done. Instead, the artist draws, we etch it, we make a proof of it, and the artist says, let's add some more here, let's take away here, let's add another, let's do something else to it. And so the matrix is grounded again with the wax that I told you about. The artist draws some more on it. It's etched again, and then another proof is pulled. And so here you see at least 2 different working states. However, there are about 7 working states for this particular print. And the final edition, which you see is framed there, the final print is how we decided to the edition of 15 of this particular print. In order to get this print made, as I mentioned, we had to invent a new ground. And this is a picture of of a test, which often when an artist comes to the dance floor at Flatbed and we don't know what we need to learn how the artist works. The artist needs to learn how we work. We need to learn how to communicate. We need to learn how they work with a particular method. We'll do something called a test plate. Sometimes the test plates are the most fun because the artist has a chance to play or to do it a little bit differently. This was the test plate for Victory the Celebration, and it's 18 inches by 20 inches, the matrix was. On the test plate, if you can read backwards, this is the proof of it. You're going to see that he says something about Conte crayon, or he's drawn with a litho crayon. These are all different ways, different media that he's drawn with on that sticky, soft ground that I was telling you about. And we're using the new liquid soft ground that we devised to try to cover the plate. And we etched it, and it worked really well, so we went on to do Victory the Celebration. But this little test plate sat in our archives for nearly 30 years. And we kept wanting to edition it, and his widow, Mary Lou Levers, gave us permission about 3 years ago to go ahead and edition this in a small edition, which we did. And it's been printed now as a Chincolet. It's in an edition, I believe, of 24. I think it's a wonderful addition to the works that Bob did. Bert Long was an artist who came to us also early, and I didn't know. I'm a newcomer to Austin. I came to Austin in 1983. Although I was born in Texas near Lubbock, I spent a long time in New Mexico, and so I didn't know who Bert Long was, but he had an exhibition at the Lyons Matrix Gallery. And this was about 1992 that he had that exhibition. I learned that he and his wife Connie were living in Spain, and he was also showing in Houston, and Camille Lyons of Lyons Matrix had invited him to have an exhibition here in Austin. And so when he came to Austin, Camille, who was a friend of ours, thought he might want to come over and make some prints. He might want to do monotypes. And Bert, being a wonderful painter and very, he wouldn't say he would go right for anything that was put in front of him. Said yes, he came over, we met him, and I'll show you a few of the things that he did, and I no longer have any of these in my possession. They're all in private collections at the time, and the prints, the slides that I'm showing you are from actual slides that we took of some of the work that he did at that time. This is a very large monoprint, meaning monoprint that there's only one, and he created it by painting the ink directly onto plexiglass. That was his matrix. He painted on the plexiglass. We put damp paper on top of his painting and rolled it through the large press that we had acquired. We had a very large press. It's 52 inches wide, and its footprint for printing is around 7.5 feet, but we can fudge that. We can get it bigger than that if we have to. So he did this particular print. It's called Looking, Seeing, Feeling Antes, and it's 43 inches wide by 53 inches high. So we had to deal with some rolled paper to work on something quite this large. And it's a bleed image. There isn't any kind of margin to it. He did another one that existed that looks almost like this, and it's called Looking, Seeing, Feeling Disputes, and that's the ghost that came from it. One of the things that you can do when you do a monotype is that you can print it directly from what the artist has painted, and then there's a little bit of ink left on the surface of the plexiglass, and the artist can change it and add a little more ink to it, kind of freshening it up a little bit, and then print it again, and it won't look the same as the first one, but it'll look very similar. And so what Bert did with his titles is he titled one Looking, Seeing, Feeling Antes, which is this one, the first one, and Looking, Seeing, Feeling Disputes, which was the second one. And I'd love to know if anybody has this in their collection, where it is now, because it was sold through Camille and through, out of Flatbed many years ago. And so I'm not sure where it is. This one is another monotype he did, and he probably did about 24 monotypes at the time, which we split between Camille Lyons and Flatbed and Bert. This is called Sangre de el Toreador, and he did two that are similar, but they don't look quite alike. This one is probably from the second impression because you see the light center that you see there. And this one is 29 inches by 41 inches. So we're using the whole sheet of paper that comes 29 by 41. It's completely covered, that whole sheet. This is one of my favorite ones Bert did, which is called Berto Commitment. And it's also on that 29 inch by 41 inch sheet of paper, completely painted. And one of the things you can do that Bert picked up on right away is applying solvent to the ink while it's on the plexiglass so he can get it to run and get it to pock the way that you see there. You see the kind of texture that he got. Vase of Afterlife. Really beautiful impression. It's also on 29. This is 41 inches high by 29 inches wide. And Soul and Spirit Felt, which is a small 20 by 14 inch direct monotype. Kelly Faring, on the other hand, is an artist who was living in Austin when I moved here, and I got to meet him pretty soon after we opened Flatbed. He had made prints much earlier when he was a part of the Fort Worth Circle, and he had created several etchings that were on zinc, but they were during World War II. This is a picture of him with Dan Rizzi, and Dan's giving him a hard time, I think, or he's giving Dan a hard time, I can't tell which, but he was a visitor to Flatbed quite a bit and liked to come down and work with us often. This one is a print that there is some controversy about it, and I brought it in because I wanted to tell you a little bit about Kelly's circumstance during the time that he was a part of the Fort Worth Circle, which was during World War II. He was working on zinc plates. He was using soft ground with textures as well as drawing. And he was using something called hard ground where he could use a needle to draw onto the plates, and he was etching them. And they were really good plates, except over the years they had started to deteriorate. And during the time of his being in Fort Worth, they could not get good paper. And so the paper they got started coming apart. It was yellowing, and it had a lot of acid in it. And so whatever impressions he pulled during that time were not stable. And he was concerned about that. And this particular image was one, I actually have a print that he pulled during the 40s in my possession, and the paper is all yellow. And Kelly was concerned about it because he really loved this particular image. The plate was deteriorated too. We couldn't do anything about that. We couldn't even print it without it looking completely frosted over. It was grayed over the whole image, and you can't bring that back. And so what we decided to do with Kelly was to take the best impression he could find of this particular image, scan it, and make a photo. It's almost like a photo reproduction, only it changes in that it becomes a photogravure on a copper plate. And so he called it Collector Revisited. And it's probably the closest thing I've done to a reproduction, except he didn't want to call it by the same title. And he wanted that image to live on. And I think it was important that we were able to do that for him. Byron Brauckley created the plate using a traditional copper photogravure process and creating a photo positive himself from that original impression that he had done. But Kelly, who stayed around Flatbed quite a bit, came to a workshop that I had in 1993 with a man from New York who had discovered a new plate. It was a photosensitive plate called a solar plate. The name of the man was Dan Wheldon. He had discovered that these polymer plates that are normally used for the commercial industry, letterpress industry, could be used to be etched. If you had a photopositive or you drew on a piece of acetate, you could get that drawing to etch onto your plate. Well, Kelly was really interested in this because he liked to draw on other things other than plates. He wanted to sample some of the older drawings that he had done, draw back into them, and put them onto plates. And so this was what he did in the workshop. He Xeroxed a very small drawing that he had done. He blew it up, he drew onto the Xerox transparency, and we created a solar plate from that. And it was printed, and he called it In Passage. He went on to take other things and do that as well. These were all done from, there may have been a painting, there may have been drawings, but he never let them stay the way they were. He didn't try to completely reproduce them. Instead, he would take those, he would have them put onto acetate, he would scratch into the acetate, he would draw onto the acetate, and he would change it until he had it the way he liked it onto the acetate. And then we would expose it to the plate, and print it. This is called the Shape of Morning, which is, you're going to see sometimes in our records, we call it photopolymer gravure, which means that we're using that photosensitive plate, and it's a polymer plate. I like for descriptions to really tell you what the matrix is, so that you know something about how that particular etching came to be. And this is, Jerry Manson was also a partner at Flatbed Press after about 1992, and he became the master printer of editioning. He was a wonderful editioner, and he did a great job printing with Kelly Fearing. And he and Kelly developed a close relationship for printing probably about a dozen different prints between 1993 and 2001. Jerry Manson pulling one of those proofs from The Shape of Morning. we invited Kelly to create a suite of prints with us soon after that, and what I'm showing you here is the dark bird and passage searching. A lot of his prints will have the term in passage. That was something that Kelly, a theme that Kelly wanted to use in a lot of his work during that time. This is Tiger Day and Night, which was also done using the polymer gravure plate. And this image, and I apologize I don't have the sizes up here, and I can give you that directly. That size is 12 inches high by 14 inches wide. This was an interesting thing. I had wanted to include this particular print because he did this in about 1997. And I see that there's a drawing over here that's probably, is this for auction over to the left? A raffle? Wonderful drawing. Well, this was the source of Kelly's polymer plate. But you see that it's cut and changed on the particular print, on the print itself. This is created using the polymer plate, and yet it's chincolé, and chincolé meaning that we're printing onto an Asian paper and it's being glued to the backing paper as it's printed. So it'll look very different than the drawing. He calls this Angel in Passage Among Leaves and Twigs and Falling Sky Pieces. And the image here is 16 by 12. Melissa Miller came to Flatbed in 1992 when a very interesting thing happened. The Modern in Fort Worth decided to have a suite of prints created by some of the most important artists in Texas. And they asked those artists to create an editioned print that they could make a part of the suite, and the artists could choose who they worked with. They chose Melissa Miller to be one of those artists, and Melissa, she and I and Mark had been talking for some time about doing a different project. She decided to come to us to do a particular project. And the project that we did is called Water Spirits. And you're seeing it on your left here, the complete print. It's printed on a really large piece of handmade paper. And the print itself is 21 inches by 15 inches. So it's a fairly large print. Each one of the colors that you see there had to be on a different plate. So Melissa had to create the image to print the way that you see there by drawing on 3 different plates. She used a combination of processes. First of all, I kind of made a little bit of a larger scale of a part of that, of the detail, so that you can see some of the different parts of the print. The brown that you see there, the kind of ochre brown that you see, is done primarily with a soft ground etching, just like we did with Robert Lever's. However, the blue, there was another plate that's the blue, that's done with a combination of soft ground and hard ground, where you use a needle and you're actually drawing through a really hard, stiff ground and scratching through the plate so that you can make that sharp line, and aqua tint. Now, I really wish I could show you how an aqua tint is done, and perhaps the next time you're here in Austin, I could have you over and do a demo for you. But aqua tint is a way for you to etch tonality into an etching plate. And so it's a way of applying rosin to the plate, and you heat it so it's there, and then you can manipulate how the acid acts on that rosin. You can make it very painterly by washing through it with a kind of a stop out, and that's exactly what Melissa did. In the very background, do you see a kind of a swirl going across like that? That swirl is on a whole nother plate. And that plate was, there was something called a white ground, which is a soapy ground that was put onto the plate. And that caused us to be able to etch kind of these brush strokes that Melissa is very well known for. So finding a way for the artist to work with the matrix is so important, because when an artist like Melissa comes, who's a painter, she needs to be able to apply those brush strokes to the matrix and get those to etch for that print to be successful. We went on to do, I'm sorry, this keeps going on fast to me, several other prints with Melissa. And this one called Anima is one that we did for something that I called the Flatbed Portfolio. Now the Flatbed Portfolio was done in 1995, 94, 95, 96, and I think the last one was finished in 99. We had 9 different artists that created prints that were sold as a group. So Melissa came to work on this particular print, and this being called Anima is a chincolé soft ground etching with some of that aqua tint that I told you about in the background, using what we call spit bite, which is when you directly paint with the acid onto the plate, and it looks very watery. And some of the white ground that you see in the background that looks very painterly, and also some aqua tint brush strokes that you see in the blue plate. There are only 2 plates that make this image, but they're printed chincolé on a special kind of paper called a Daphne paper, which is made from Daphne fibers, laurel wood fibers, and it was made in Nepal. So all those choices came to be very important to make this image. And I have a really interesting story about it, because when you work with a painter like Melissa, she came to us with a complete, very, very colorful painting that she wanted to make this etching into. And it really required about 6 plates, 1 plate for every color. There was a green plate, there was a really bright blue plate, there was a red plate, there was a brown plate, and there was another plate, probably a different value of green. And so I etched them all, they all worked together, and we kept printing them, and they never worked. They just didn't work. And we were tearing our hair out about it. It was like, why can't we make this work? And a good friend of Melissa's and ours too, Larry Shoulder, who taught at SMU, was into the shop at the time. And so he comes in and he looks and he sees that I've just pulled a proof with 2 plates, these 2 plates. And he says to Melissa, he said, there's your print, stop trying to make it a painting, make it a print. That's one of the, and she agreed with him, and I did too. I mean, the whole thing works so well as a print with 2 colors. That's one of the most, an artist who works at Flatbed or at any press like Flatbed has to be open to the process of making a print. Making a print is not like making a painting. It takes a whole, you have to open up your eyes to the possibility it's not going to look like a sketch that you've done with color pencils in your sketchbook, or something that you have back on a canvas in your studio. You have to open up your eyes and your whole self to the process of what a fine art print can look like. So, so the next time Melissa came, which was 2 years after that, she and I started a print for the Dallas Visual Arts Association. Do any of you remember that association in Dallas? It's a great association of collectors interested in contemporary prints. And at the time, they did a print every year for their members. And Melissa was chosen one year to do a print. And we started this print which ended up being called the group. And I wanted to show you this particular working state. So this is what an artist sees as they're working. They might do the first drawing onto the plate, and we etch it and we print it. And can you see that she's used soft ground there because there's a very pencil-y-like line? So she sees this, and immediately there are notes on this. And these are the kind of things I have in my archives. I save all these working proofs that show the whole process that we go through to make these prints. So these notes show what Melissa's decided to do. Like, we're going to add some tone here, we're going to take away some tone there, we're going to add to it. So this is the final print. And so there's several other layers. I think we must have etched this about 7 more times just to add the kind of layers that you see here. A lot of this was accomplished with what you call spit bite aquatint, where Melissa is painting with the acid directly onto the plate to add the kind of tones that you see there. The red, however, she decided she wanted to hand color. And so one of the beauties of doing an etching or any other print is that an artist can add hand coloring to the image if they want to. And then there was this man, and his name was James Surls, and I'd never heard of him before. But no, I had. No, because when I moved to Texas in 1983, I think it was 1984, 85, I came across Annette Carlozzi's book, 50 Artists from Texas. I may be saying that wrong. And I was astounded at the depth of art in Texas, and I saw James's work in that particular book. And so James got wind that we had a 52-inch wide press that could print an image nearly 8 feet long. And the next thing I know, I have a box at my door with a rolled up piece of linoleum that he probably didn't say this, but I felt like he said, print this. Yeah. So I did. I unrolled it and I put it on a piece of masonite, and Jerry Manson and I spent all of Thanksgiving vacation in 1990 trying to print it, and we finally got it to print really well. It's not the only thing we did with James that year, but this one is called Tomorrow. You see the impression on the right. I don't have a good slide of it. I don't think we've ever had a good enough slide of it. It's a very large, let me give you the size of it. You could get an idea from them pulling it, but it's 72 inches high by 36 inches wide. We printed it on paper that was 42 inches wide by 77 inches long. We printed it on Arches cover buff, which is a real hard paper to print on, so we had to dampen the paper to print it the way that you see there. So edition of 15. So James hired us to do this edition of 15. We also did, and I was really glad to see James's presentation. This is called Night Vision, and I kind of now know where the sculpture Night Vision fits into this. This is a woodcut that James did, and Night Vision, we printed it in 1991. James may have carved this block a little bit sooner than that, but one of my most favorite prints I think we've ever done is this particular print. Just kind of an astounding imagery for a woodcut, amazing. So it's done on the image size is 34.5 by 71 inches wide, and the paper is 40 by 77 inches. And it's also printed on Arches cover buff. When I went to James's studio for him to sign Tomorrow and Night Vision, I happened to see that he liked to draw, and he had drawings all over the studio that were done with charcoal or wide pencil, it looked like. And so that gave us the idea of doing a soft ground etching. So when James was also invited for the Moderns print expo that they were going to have, he was invited to do a print for the Fort Worth Modern. He chose to work with us, and I asked him to try to do a soft ground etching. I think it was the first time he had done a soft ground etching. So here we are looking at the first proof. I think the first one we didn't work, but he was kind enough to work again on another plate, and we were able to do the one that we call Thought, which is this particular etching. It's a soft ground etching, but instead of it having lots of working states, as James explained earlier, he draws and then that's it. And we have to be good enough of printmakers to etch it correctly or it won't work. So we were able to etch this particular matrix well, and we decided to print it as a chine-collé etching, which means it's printed on some Asian paper. I don't know if you can see it from that previous slide, that has a little bit of bark embedded in it, and it's called Thai cherry paper. He came back in 1999 as he was making his transition to Colorado. And he said, I'll work with you about these. I want to do these prints that are 12 inches by 12 inches, only if you can print on the front and the back and I can see both at the same time. Well, I'd never done that one before, but I mean, I'm kind of like James in that way. I kind of like figuring stuff out, and I don't like to say no. I like to figure it out. So, you know, it was about the transition. It was about being in two places at one time, from what I understand. It was about being in Texas and being in Colorado at the same time. And so he made these wonderful soft ground matrices. Here's a picture of the matrix. You see that? Here's a picture of the print. So the print has the matrix was printed on the front side and the back side, and then we impregnated the paper with I figured out that if I made a really thin lacquer, handmade lacquer varnish, I could impregnate the paper with that, and after it dried, it would look translucent or transparent. And so that's what we did. And we let it dry, and then we coated what we thought would be the back, and we collated it or collaged it onto a better support, onto a heavier Arches cover paper support. And after it was collaged, you could actually see both sides at the same time, accomplishing what we were trying to do. A lot of people can't see that, but once you really study this print, you'll see it. Here's the 5 that are in that suite. We call it the Flatbed Suite. And we've also done prints with James from Heartland. We call it the Heartland Suite, which includes 11 prints by James. And these were done from his drawings, and we used the polymer plates, changing drastically the scale of the work of the drawings, and we etched them into the polymer plates. And instead of them being on a blank white sheet of paper, James chose this greener, it's called Thai tamarind paper that we use as chine-collé. And all 11 images are shown right here. I hope you can see the green with this, because they're really a brilliant, not a bright Kelly green, but they're a beautiful kind of a green background with the paper. These got put into a box and with letterpress title page, with an essay by Charmaine, with a colophon as well, and a poem by James. So it's a beautiful set called the Heartland Suite. And I won't say a lot more. Somebody else says a little bit something about this, but this was quite an adventure to do this particular print. Cut hand, hurt eyes, which, you know, we printed it. If you ever have any questions, I'll answer them. And I'm very proud of it. I think it's an amazing print and amazing solution to what could have been a kind of a sad thing. We printed Through It All with James, sometimes with, I think this particular print was finished in the 80s, but it was never completely editioned. Just a few impressions were made of it. And James always wanted to finish this edition or make this edition work. I could never find paper big enough. This particular print is a 4x8 matrix, and it's, so we finally were able to find a publisher who would buy paper from Japan for us that ended up costing about $400 a sheet because it was a wonderful mashi paper. So we printed this in 2009, I believe, and it took a crew of 4 to pull off these prints. And this is called Through It All, and it's a woodcut. How am I running over? Okay, well we'll go fast because I do want to show John Alexander, who didn't come to us until the year 2000. In 2000, Flatbed moved to our other location in Martin Luther King, and we were able to do lithography for the very first time. John wanted to work on a series of prints that were more about single objects or single. You'll see when I show you, but he wanted to work with them like he could work with charcoal. And we found a certain kind of material he could draw on the plates with that was a compressed Xerox toner. And he could draw on these plates and get the kind of smudging that he likes to do with charcoal. So this is called Angry Heron, and it's printed on a 30 by 22 piece of paper. And Strange Fish, which is also printed on some Nepalese paper. All of these lithographs that John did took about 7 to 8 plates to create all the colors. And all of them took about 18 months to do. Since James was living in Amagansett, my printers went to Amagansett to work with him, and then they came back and proofed, and we sent proofs back and forth. And that's not uncommon with most shops for a lot of proofing to happen and mailing back and forth. But John had to come down at least 2 more times to make more plates to add to these. This is called Lilies, Roses, a raven on a flag, and they're all approximately 30 by 22. And then John decided to draw on some mylar for us and make some prints that we could use for the polymer plate method. And so instead of like Kelly would Xerox and draw and scratch away, John drew directly onto the mylar, and we created these particular plates, these polymer plates, with his direct drawings. They're printed, this one is printed Chincolé, and is printed in kind of a very dark green color. And then this is the one that he did called Owl, which is, let me give you the size on that. It's about 16 inches high from my memory. No, yeah, 16 by 12. And the last artist I want to talk about, and I hope you aren't too tired from all this, is Luis Jimenez, who we have worked with. We worked with him in 1994 when he came to work on a print for the Flatbed portfolio that I had told you about. I picked up Luis at the airport and never met him before, and he had a pack of slides. You remember slides, right? And these were slides of his drawings that he had just finished, where he had done studies of himself with animal faces and death head faces. And he said, okay, I want to do these. And I had already known the size that we wanted to work, which was one of the largest prints we had done apart from Victory the Celebration. So he came to Flatbed, and we got right to work with a 3-plate print. And this is what came of it. He calls it self-portrait. He was working, he only had 5 days to work. And if any of you knew, if you ever knew Louise, you knew that he worked hard, continuously, and into all hours of the night. And so we were able to complete the proofing for this in 5 days. So this is the completed print, which, let me give you the size of it, which is, the image itself is 45 inches high and it's 32 inches wide. And we printed it on Somerset white, a warm white. And this is, I want to show you this because you'll see some working states. Because after we got the plates done, we proofed it about 10 more times with different colors and different stages of the print, putting one plate first and one plate last so that we could get a different look at this. And so you're only seeing 3 of the states here, along with some of the 3 matrices. Finally, he chose one of them, and that was the one that we ended up doing the edition of. It was an edition of 50, which I'll never do again. Well, I won't say never, but I mean, it was a lot of prints to print, and they're out there, and they're still, I think one of them, I think it's a landmark print for Louise. It was the most personal print I think I've ever seen him do. And so there you have it. He came back in 2006 and to work, he was a very generous man, to work on a print for the Folklife people here in Austin. And in the background of this particular slide, you see the lithograph that he had just finished for the Texas Folklife group. And while he was here, do you see the little stone on the table and to his right? He saw that little stone, and he was listening to the news about Abu Ghraib on the radio as he was drawing. And he said, "Kathy, can I just draw on that stone?" I said, "Well, sure. Let me get it ready for you first." So we grained the stone, and with a lithograph, what you do is you draw directly onto the matrix, which is a stone. Or it can be a plate, like John Alexander, but in Louise's case, it was a stone. So he drew this image onto this tiny stone, which was just incredible. Here it is, about Abu Ghraib. And he said, "I really want to work on your big stone. I have a big stone, it's 3 feet by 4 feet. And I really want to make this image on that stone." So we said, "We'll make it happen." So he went back to Houston where he was living. He hired some models to work from because he wanted to get more anatomical information into the drawings. And we took about a week for us to get the stone ready for him. And he came back and he drew on the stone. And this is the print this was the lithograph that he did right from that stone. And you can see the edge of the stone. He left, this was May. We proofed it. He said, "I think I'm done with that drawing. You know, that's it. If anything, I might add a background color, but I think we're done." I said, "Okay." He went away, that's May, and he died the next month at his studio in Hondo, New Mexico. So I had one phone conversation with him before he passed away where he said, "Yeah," he just assured me, "Yeah, that drawing's done." So after his death, there was some confusion with his estate. Finally, we were okayed from his estate to print the small stone and the large one, which we did do. And this was finally signed by the estate, I believe, in 2010. So they are both in editions that we've done. You know, that's my last slide, and I think I wanted to end on it, not as a downer note, but I just wanted to emphasize all these prints that I've shown you today. There's an importance to doing prints. I mean, yes, they take time, they take They take a lot of work with a master printer. It's hard on an artist doing another practice to go somewhere else and work on something. And yet these prints can exist in everybody's home in more than one place. They're in small editions, but if you have a Luis Jimenez in your house, and there's one in the museum, and somebody in Dallas has one, what you're saying, what the artist is saying in that print, gets seen and said so much more than if you could just go one place and see a painting. And so I think, you know, prints are important for that reason. Prints are important because they're so democratic. They don't necessarily have to have a message, but they get the image out there that the artist wants to say. And I'm glad and grateful that so many artists want to come and work with us to make prints. I think they're going to exist for a long time, the work that we do. They're done archivally, they are done well, they bring, you know, great rewards to the artist and to the collectors who have them, and I'm appreciative of that. So thank you very much. If you have any questions.
One question first.
Sure. Yeah.
You mentioned the working states. Have you done more prints like that from the working states? I mean, editions?
No, working states are never editioned, but they are the state of the matrix at that particular time. And so they are, when you look at our archives, you'll see working states, and you can actually see the progress of the matrix when you see those working states, but they're never editioned.
Okay, so you haven't done them.
Thank you, Katherine.
Yes.
Let's give her another hand.